welcome to NYU's special coverage of the 2010 midterm elections. I'm Andrew Hongo.
And I'm Elisa Lagos. Tonight we find out if Republicans have ridden that wave of dissent all the way back to Washington to take back one or both houses of Congress. In fact, it is projected that Republicans did win the House of Representatives. Now, all the seats in the House are up for grabs, as are 37 Senate seats.
In addition, there are 36 gubernatorial races, which could prove critical in the upcoming presidential election. Governors have the power to redistrict areas, possibly impacting results for 2012. But first off tonight, we head out west to Nevada, where polling stations just closed. In what may be the most closely watched race of 2010, Democratic Senate Majority Leader Harry Reid is trying to hold off a challenge from Tea Party upstart Sharon Angle. And we'll be bringing you news on that as it develops. Now, we already have some network projections here. In Kentucky, the race for Senate has Rand Paul, the Republican and Tea Party candidate, winning over Jack Conway, the Democratic candidate. Also in Florida, also in a race for Senate, candidate Marco Rubio, a Republican and Tea Party-backed candidate, beat Governor Charlie Crist and Ken Meek.
Now, the networks are also projecting some wins for Democrats. In Vermont's Senate race, the Democrat Patrick Leahy did win over the Republican Len Britton, while in Delaware's race, the Democrat Chris Coons beat out the Tea Party favorite Christine O'Donnell. Now, here in New York, both Kristen Gillibrand as well as Charles Schumer retain their Senate seats.
And here with a look at a few key Senate races is our reporter and analyst, Annie Dietz. Now, Annie, a lot of people have been talking about the Senate race in Nevada. We have Sharon Angle, the Tea Party candidate, trying to oust Senate Majority Leader Harry Reid. A lot at stake for the Democrats there. Annie, what can you tell us about that race?
Well, Andrew, just like you guys said, this is part of a major push by conservatives all over the country to retake Congress. We don't know exactly what's going on yet in Nevada. The polls just closed, so we'll update you guys as that comes in. But it's going to be really, really close. Sharon Angle mounted a major campaign riddled with, extreme comments and controversies that, as a result, instead of being an easy oust for her of Harry Reid, wound up being really close. So we'll see what happens. But the results of this have major implications for the rest of the country, and it also depends on what happens with the rest of the Senate, because if Majority Leader Reid loses, there's big issues, as well as if the Democrats lose control. In Kentucky, the conservatives also took control with Rand Paul over Jack Conway. In Florida, we have Marco Rubio, so this is Tea Party. But up, in Connecticut and Delaware, we've got, different things going on. So in Connecticut, we have Richard Blumenthal was able to maintain over Linda McMahon, and we'll see what happened there.
Thank you, Annie, for that update on Connecticut. And now we go live to Connecticut, where our very own Charlie Payne is standing by at Democratic headquarters in Stamford. Charlie, you're there at the campaign office for Senate candidate Richard Blumenthal. What is the latest there?
Oh my gosh, Andrew, it's an absolute zoo. We got here about 2 hours ago at around 8, and it was somewhat busy, but I tell you, the last 2 hours has really increased the activity. As you know, a couple hours ago, about an hour ago rather, the Blumenthal raised his calls in his favor. Linda McMahon lost that election. But really what everyone's eyes are on tonight is the governor election with Malloy and Foley. Right now, it's still a virtual dead heat. As you might have heard, there's been a recount in Bridgeport, which has been huge news. In fact, when we got here, there was actually hushed silence in this whole building as every person in the building was calling people in Bridgeport to get them to go out and vote. It's really, it's quite an amazing scene here. People young and old, about 100 people here. There's wine flowing, cake. It's really a sight to remember.
Eco.
Thank you, Charlie, for that report. Now, one of the most notable events to happen this midterm election has been the emergence of the Tea Party. But just who are they? What do they stand for? And how are they impacting politics across the country? For answers, we
Tea Party movement.
Tea Party people.
Tea Parties.
Tea Party.
The Tea Party.
Why are people shocked or something? Why aren't
We've
people
heard their
on the
anthem.
nose? As I squeak like a mouse, there's a
We've seen their flag. They are backing 138 Republican candidates in this midterm election.
We are all united by the bigger banner of tax simplification.
But who are the Tea Party?
The conservative movement has found a reason to live. They have found something about which they feel very positive, something they are ready to rally around.
We are sick and tired of the government taking our money.
This administration has changed the direction of the economy towards more government and less private enterprise.
They are against taxes, support small government, and have become an umbrella for a variety of causes.
I'm here basically to voice my displeasure with the way things are going right now.
I believe that God gives us our rights, the government doesn't.
So this November, what do you say? Let's take back our country!
So who are the real players in the Tea Party? At the center is the self-styled Mama Grizzly, Sarah Palin.
You may not be welcome in those health care negotiations, but you have an invitation to the Tea Party.
The former governor of Alaska has become a darling of the right-wing media, and she regularly appears on Fox News.
The rest of America to believe is encompassing the Tea Party movement.
Christine O'Donnell, who Palin endorsed, caused a media storm when she defeated Mike Castle. Commentators have questioned whether O'Donnell is qualified enough.
Is that Ms. O'Donnell is so inexperienced and not able to make her points in a way that will persuade the independents in Delaware.
But what O'Donnell supporters like most about her is that she does not seem like a politician.
I'll go to Washington and do what you do. I'm Christine O'Donnell, and I approve this message. I'm you.
The Tea Party has certainly made their mark on these midterm elections. And if Tea Party candidates win enough seats, will people look back at tonight as the moment that American politics changed? Could tonight be the birth of a third political party?
Everybody living in the White House! Everybody! There's a communist living in the White House! Now what are we going to do about it?
Thank you, France and Stacy, for that Tea Party report. And now for an update on House races, which several networks are already calling in favor of the Republicans. But we have here with us our House reporter, Becky Flom. Becky, the Republicans need to pick up 39 seats to take over the House. Tell us, where do we stand now, and how confident are you that the Republican Party can do this?
Well, Andrew, right now NBC is predicting that the Republicans are going to take 62 seats. This is sort of a referendum. The Republicans kind of framed it as a referendum on Obama economics. Some significant categories of Democratic losses were in seats in traditional Republican districts that were won in the Obama wave of 2008, like Indiana's 9th district. Barron Hill was beaten out. He's a freshman representative. Florida's 8th, Alan Grayson, was notorious in the healthcare debates. He lost his seat to Daniel Webster. And one significant loss for the Democrats was in Virginia's 5th district. Obama came out really hard for Tom Perriello, and it just didn't work, and he lost his seat to Robert Hurt. Another significant loss for the Democrats were some long-term Democrats. Rick Boucher in Virginia's 9th district, a 28-year veteran representative, lost his seat. And it's projected in South Carolina's 5th district that John Spratt is going to lose his seat. He's a 25-year incumbent. We're also closely watching Colorado's 3rd district. John Salazar beat out the Republicans in this sort of right-leaning district 6 years ago, and now it appears that he is going to be losing his seat to Scott Tipton. One of these sort of contentious areas that Democrats didn't think they were going to have to watch was Massachusetts' 4th. Barney Frank's seat. He had quite a battle. And after Scott Brown won Ted Kennedy's seat back in 2009, this traditionally Democratic state was put on notice. So Barney Frank managed to hold on to his seat so far. And that's what I've got so far on the projections.
Thank you, Becky, for that. Now, as most keep an eye on the Senate and House races, the gubernatorial races across the nation have become nothing short of political theater. At stake is the redrawing of district lines, which could play a crucial role in the 2012 presidential election. Now, down in Florida, Republican Rick Scott has taken an early lead over the Democrat Alex Sink.
Meanwhile, out in California, former Democratic Governor Jerry Brown is favored to win over Republican Meg Whitman, the former CEO of eBay. And in Illinois' gubernatorial race, we have Pat Quinn, the Democratic candidate, with 51.4%, a substantial lead over Republican Bill Brady with 41.3%.
But one of the most bizarre races has been the New York gubernatorial campaign. Here we've seen Democrat State Attorney General Andrew Cuomo go head-to-head against the fiery Republican Carl Palladino and other more eccentric candidates. For more, we turn to our Liz Kreutz, who is standing by at Cuomo's campaign headquarters. Liz, this has been one of the most interesting gubernatorial races anywhere in the country, and Cuomo did win this election. What can you tell us about the mood where you are?
Hi, Elisa and Andrew. Yes, I am here at the Sheraton in Midtown for the New York Democratic Party election night party. And here in New York, it really is a party. This is pretty much the place to be tonight. Andrew Cuomo and Chuck Schumer and Kirsten Gillibrand are all here tonight, although we saw Chuck Gillibrand, we've yet to see Kirsten or Cuomo. But even so, it's sort of tonight in New York, this is sort of like blue oasis in a sea of red. We were talking, Andrew Cuomo, none of these were very unexpected wins. Andrew Cuomo, in fact, was much anticipated. He has been way ahead in the polls. New York Times even had him as a 100% chance that he would win a few days ago. And even Palladino's very own hometown newspaper in Buffalo has endorsed Cuomo. So not really unexpected, but big victories nonetheless. In fact, we were talking to Chuck Schumer earlier tonight at this party, and he was saying that what he really thinks put Cuomo so far ahead in this campaign was the fact that he's really focused on the people. And despite the fact that Palladino called him a group of pedigreed poodles and part of the political elite, he really has put his campaign and his focus as governor towards the people, and his number one goal as governor will be to clean up Albany and to, make ethics reform, sort of get New York's government back on its feet. So while that's still to come for Cuomo as governor, here tonight, people are just celebrating. They're having a good time. There is an open bar, which is fun, and lots of free food, and people dressed up to the nines. So it's a very fun night here in Midtown and Sheraton, at the Sheraton.
Sounds like a great day up there for the Democrats. Thank you, Liz. We now head to Suzanne Bartoli at the New York Republican Metropolitan Club on the Upper East Side. Suzanne, probably a different feel there. You've got a lot of Palladino fans there. How are they reacting to news of the Republicans' defeat?
Well, not all the results are in all the way, but a few minutes ago I stood here as a very bored audience listening to the acceptance speeches for Charles Schumer and Kirsten Gillibrand, the two new Democrats who were reelected for the New York Senate. Right now, everyone's just kind of mingling around awkwardly. It kind of feels like one big, massive party balloon deflating. I think it's the best way I can describe it. Hopefully they'll be leaving soon and I could give my works at that delicious buffet over there. But I don't know. It's kind of mellow. Everyone seems to have dressed up for the wrong candidate tonight.
Thank you, Susan. Now, attack ads, name calling, it's all part of negative campaigning. To some, this year's mudslinging has been the worst ever. But is this really different from any other year? Steve McCann and Charlie Hoxie take a look.
Dukakis not only opposes the death penalty, he allowed first-degree murderers to have weekend passes from prison.
Attack ads are nothing new. They've been a part of political campaigning for years.
Weekend prison passes. Dukakis on crime.
But over $1 billion were spent on campaign ads this year, and over half of those ads were negative. But according to a recent poll, only 8% of Americans consider themselves more likely to vote for a candidate who uses negative ads. So why go negative?
Look, negative ads are run in desperation, but they're mostly run out of opportunity. You find an argument in the polling that hurts the other candidate, and you run the ad.
There are cases where you want to point out weaknesses in your opponent's record, and maybe they should be pointed out if they're not being focused on.
Polls indicated that Andrew Cuomo's lead over Carl Palladino had shrunk to just under 10% when he released this attack ad.
Official filings show only one job was created.
He quickly regained a comfortable position and appears primed to win tonight.
And it seems that New Yorkers are especially accustomed to negative campaigning. The number of New York voters who feel that it's possible for a candidate to win without using negative tactics is 13% lower than the national average.
But if you're in a race that really matters, that's going to move a lot of money within the boundaries of what you can do, you should probably do any means necessary to win.
But negative tactics don't always pay off.
If you look in Kentucky at the Democratic candidate, Attorney General Conway, he ran an ad questioning Rand Paul, the Libertarian Republican Tea Party candidate.
Christianity and Christ. Why did Rand Paul once tie a woman up?
And this ad backfired tremendously. I think it took what was at least a possibility of winning for Conway and made certain that he could not win under any circumstances.
But even though attack ads can be a gamble, they're on the air more than ever, due in part to a Supreme Court ruling in January that allows for unlimited campaign financing from wealthy corporations.
The Supreme Court ruling, the 5-4 ruling, which turns corporations into persons and gives them First Amendment protection and lets them pour huge amounts of money anonymously into political campaigns, is really corrosive for the system.
After reviewing nearly 1 million political ads this season, the Wesleyan Media Project announced yesterday that this year's campaigning continued the trend of previous elections with another increase in attack ads.
I don't know why we keep going on and on and on about this cycle after cycle after cycle, because it happens, nothing is going to stop it, and it's going to continue to happen.
And with corporate campaign spending playing a major role in tonight's midterm elections, we can all but assume it will have a significant impact on the presidential elections just 2 years from now. Reporting for NYU Tonight's Election Special, I'm Charlie Hoxie.
Thank you, Charlie. One of the biggest stories to emerge in these elections has been campaign contributions. An estimated $4 billion have been donated to political campaigns, and much of that has been donated anonymously. Jeffrey Ingersoll and Haya Fatima Iqbal have more.
Ken Buck's plan for our schools doesn't add up. The NEA Advocacy Fund is responsible for the...
Ken Buck could have done better without the Supreme Court's Citizens United ruling in January, allowing corporations and unions unlimited spending on campaign ads.
The National Education Union spent $1.5 million in October on direct spending for ads targeted against Buck.
Buck's chances of winning the election promptly fell by almost 20%, a reflection of the new corporate spending allowed by the Citizens United decision.
Critics say the decision on the case opens the door for more corporate influence in politics, while supporters hail it as a victory for free speech. Whether free speech or corporate influence, powerful organizations took quick action. Corporate interests also played a factor here in New York, where Karl Rove's American Crossroads spent $300,000 against New York incumbent Democrat Maurice Hinchey.
Kill our jobs. Crossroads donations come from coal, oil, and natural gas corporations. These entities support Republican George Phillips because he lobbied for a deregulation of the energy industry.
Crossroad ads against Hinchey may appear to be in the best interests of everyday voters, but the money trail speaks of interest only in the corporate bottom line.
A spin-off of American Crossroads is Crossroads GPS, which, as a nonprofit, with the new regulations, can fund political ads without disclosing donors, leaving us in the dark not only tonight, but in 2012 as well.
Thank you, Jeffrey and Haya. And Maurice Hinchey, who we just saw in that piece, is winning right now for New York's 22nd District with 56% of the vote in. Joining us now in the studio to discuss political contributions are Lindsay Cormick and Thomas Zaitov, both PhD students at New York University's Political Science Department. Welcome to both of you. Thank you for being with us. Now, as we've just heard, political contributions have been skyrocketing. Lindsay, could you tell us why that is in this particular election and what it's meant for the election?
Sure. So one of the reasons is this recent Citizens United Supreme Court case that essentially allows corporations and unions to spend unlimited amounts of funds on electioneering communications. That means corporations and unions can create their own ads to air on television, radio, or the internet that can influence elections.
I think, and also I'd like to add that one of the big narratives of this campaign has been that Citizens United is seen as benefiting Republicans and hurting Democrats. You know, Republicans are closer to big business, so big business will give them more money, and it lowers the limits on this. However, recent research has shown that that campaign contributions are not monolithic, and that Fortune 500 companies both contribute to Democrats and Republicans. So Bank of America's board actually gives more towards Republicans, whereas Goldman Sachs gives to Democrats. So I think it's a little less clear what's going to happen with Citizens United.
So, so corporations give to both to candidates from both parties, but we also have candidates that are self-financed. We've had Linda McMahon, we had Carly Fiorina. How does that play into the amount of money that has been spent, record amount that has been spent in this election season?
Well, I think the short answer to your question is that it plays in not very well. Linda McMahon lost in Connecticut. Carly Fiorina for the Senate in California is expected to lose. Meg Whitman is also expected to lose. So I don't think money necessarily translates into votes in this respect.
Yeah, we're certainly seeing that it helps these candidates get their name recognized and get out initially. What we're not seeing is this money necessarily translate into electoral success.
All right, now the economy. Exit polls have shown that the economy is one of the biggest concerns that voters have. Now, do you think, how much of a role did that play?
I think this election is almost entirely about the economy. Not only are our exit polls telling us this is weighing on voters' minds, the pre-election polls have also said that it's the economy that's really driving the fervor to vote this election, and it might not turn out so well for Democrats.
Yeah, I mean, I think you have a financial crisis that is still affecting, most of the electorate to this day. Continued unemployment, there's a lot of uncertainty, and Obama and the Democrats are an easy target.
Well, thank you to both of you for being here today with us. Coming up, we head out live to Kentucky.
Plus, how pivotal is the issue of health care in these midterms? It's making or breaking candidates. We'll take a look. Stay with us. Welcome back. We've got new numbers coming in. Officially, 14 seats in the House have been won by Republicans, but they are projected to win up to 62 seats.
In addition, we have some more good news for the GOP. Remember, the Republicans need to pick up 10 seats in the Senate to get a majority. We have 3 additional Senate seats going to the GOP, and those are in Indiana, Arkansas, and North Dakota. Now, the Senate race in Kentucky has turned into one of the election's most compelling and bizarre. Live from Kentucky, we have with us Chris Olson, a volunteer leader for Democratic candidate Jack Conway. Chris, how are you?
So far, so good. It's been an interesting night down here.
Indeed it has. Thanks for being with us. Chris, this has been a most unusual race with accusations of secret societies and aqua Buddha against Republican candidate Rand Paul. Can you tell us how that ultimately played into the outcome of this election?
Yeah, I think definitely the mood down here from day one that the so-called aqua Buddha ad came out. I don't know if the phrase would be impending doom, but certainly that did affect the race. I think there was no doubt there was certainly a backlash that some polls that were coming out just before this aqua Buddha ad came out had Conway down by maybe somewhere between 2 and 5 points down. And as you see tonight, that Conway will probably lose by about 12 points. So there's no doubt that there was certainly a backlash. Conway's only path to victory after this was, to get a good turnout, particularly in Louisville and Lexington, which are the progressive strongholds here in Kentucky. But it turns out that Conway only won Lexington by about 2 percentage points. So it was nowhere near the kind of turnout that Jack Conway was expecting to pull it out.
Right. Now, Chris, I know it's not Monday yet, but let's do a little bit of Monday morning quarterbacking since you've worked with Jack Conway. What could he have done differently in this election? Or what should he have done differently in this election?
I think that there are a number of issues that Conway could have hit Rand Paul on, from mine safety to civil rights to disabled rights to student loans, that he was hitting pretty effectively. And I think that there's going to be a lot of woulda, coulda, shoulda stuff happening in the next week regarding the aqua Buddha ad. I think that you're going to hear a lot of that, but that really is probably the number one thing that you can point to, because I think that there were probably several issues that Conway was certainly making headway, and the aqua Buddha ad appeared to be a Hail Mary, just a desperation pass here in the last week. So I think most people will definitely point to that.
Great. Chris, just one last question here. What changes, if any, can Kentucky citizens look forward due to this change?
Well, I think, in a basic sense, Rand Paul will be replacing the retiring Jim Bunning, who's also a Republican. So in that sense, it's still a Republican seat, and Jim Bunning was known for filibustering things like unemployment benefits. So that kind of Republican limited government brand is still continuing. And I suppose the most interesting thing about this whole race is that, believe it or not, there are actually more registered Democrats than Republicans here in the state of Kentucky. But Rand Paul was able to attract more Democrats than Jack Conway was Republican. So that may be a trend we'll see in upcoming elections, but that remains to be seen.
Very interesting, very interesting. Thank you, Chris, so much for being with us. We appreciate your time.
Whether young or old, Republican or Democrat, changes in healthcare affect everyone. Now, after recent reforms to healthcare, the issue has been the center for many campaigns. Now, some are pushing to get rid of reforms. Others remain staunchly in favor of them. And here on campus, students have sent a message to candidates in favor of universal health care. Yara Costa and Stacey Liebach-Meadow have the story.
My name is Ramon and I'm 24. Something that is not on my list is getting sick.
When I was a student, I had a shoulder surgery that was like $22,000. But if I wasn't covered under my parents, I probably would be impoverished.
But since the passing of the Patient and Affordable Care Act,
this Congress passed a law to provide and protect health insurance for 11 million American children.
people can now look forward to being covered under their parents' health plan until the age of 26. Yet despite these changes, the issue of health care continues to be a divisive issue for the midterm.
Uncle Sam has no business coming in the examination room.
They decided to try an experiment to grow government, raise taxes, and take over health care.
And I'm the only one running that will vote to repeal and replace Obamacare.
The heated controversy over health care does not seem to reflect the general attitude seen around the NYU campus.
If it helps more people have health insurance, I think it's a good idea.
Because it's the economy, people aren't getting jobs, so they can't get insurance through their jobs, so it would make sense that they have an alternative, which is through their parents.
I think I'd feel more of a strain if my children didn't have health care and, God forbid, got into an accident or something. You're looking at hundreds of thousands of dollars then. This I can handle.
Still, candidates argue the new regulation will increase the deficit at a time of economic woe.
This health care bill is a disaster for our country, a disaster for our health care system, and will bankrupt our country.
Even though there seems to be no controversy among these voters, health care will be a determining factor on Election Day.
I would vote for a candidate that supports universal health care.
I would root for a candidate who's pro.
I personally want universal health care.
Reporting for NYU News, I'm Stacey Liebach-Meadow.
After record turnouts from young voters in the polls in 2008, Democrats tried to reinvigorate those voters who usually stay away during midterm elections, which could mean trouble. Now, Annie Dietz and Becky Flom tell us why.
Honor to welcome the President of the United States, Barack Obama.
In the 2008 presidential elections, young voters accounted for about 80% of the popular vote margin that got President Obama elected.
I voted for Obama. I voted for Obama.
I voted for Obama.
In the 2 weeks leading up to the 2010 midterm elections, Obama tried to rally the young members of his Democratic constituency that helped him succeed 2 years ago.
Can I just make a plug just to vote? Make sure that folks out there...
MTV's Rock the Vote registered about 250,000 new young voters this year, but it's estimated that only 35% of registered voters between the ages of 18 and 30 will actually vote.
In 2 weeks, you've got the chance to say once again, yes, we can.
There is some debate as to why. Polls suggest that 65% of all senior citizens, a core group among Republicans, were enthusiastic about the midterms largely due to their unhappiness with Obama's handling of the economy. Young voters, however, aren't so quick to judge.
My goal was just to see things not get worse, and I think that's been the case, actually. People didn't all hear that, so they wanted to see more of a change than there's been.
He could definitely be doing a lot worse, is what I want to say. So, yeah, I've confidence that eventually he'll become better, maybe.
What does keep them away is what experts call an enthusiasm gap, lack of motivation that could hurt the Democrats at the polls today.
I haven't done my research and I don't have time for it, I guess.
Like it's just less of a big deal, or maybe there's just less stuff about the candidates.
You will recapture that spirit.
As the White House awaits the results of these midterm elections, they will be looking ahead to 2012.
You do not give up hope.
And how to reignite that original Obama excitement.
Thank you.
For NYU Tonight, I'm Annie Dietz.
Thank you, Annie and Becky. Now joining us in the studio today is Suzanne Rosdiba, a graduate student here at NYU Journalism, as well as a contributing reporter to the New York Times and the New York Post. Suzanne, welcome.
Thank you.
Thanks for being with us. Now, Suzanne, we just saw a piece recently about how young people are very excited, for the most part, about healthcare reforms, but not everyone is excited about this. Several conservative candidates have actually been running on platforms to repeal some of the healthcare reforms. Can you give us some insight into how this issue has played out in the recent elections?
Nothing gets the candidates' blood boiling like this issue. I mean, it has really become a fear amongst Democrats that if Republicans take control of the House, that there are going to be some serious influences in terms of public opinion on the healthcare reform. And for young voters, it's especially an important issue, and something that Obama went on a Chicago radio station today and talked about, and said that young voters really need to get out there, because if this healthcare reform is in any way, if there's any sort of changes, then young voters who get insurance up until the age of 26, that they could lose that. So there's a concern on both the young voters and in general that there's this fear that the Republicans will really sway public opinion.
Now, despite all the concerns that young voters may have in these elections and President Obama's push to get them to go out, exit polls show that actually fewer young voters went out this midterm election than did back in 2008. Why do you think that is?
Well, the New York Times had a story today talking about to a lot of university students, saying that they felt that President Obama's President Obama's team hadn't gone out and attracted young voters like he did in the presidential election, that they felt that there was a bigger distance between the candidates and the young voters. They felt that they weren't as encouraged to come out, that they weren't participating in the campaigns, there were less volunteers. Some people have said that it's because of the midterm effect, that in general, a lot of, younger voters will not necessarily come out for this campaign, but
that's really across the board as well.
Yeah, absolutely. But they just said that they felt that Obama started appealing to the younger vote too late.
So looking ahead already to 2012, is there anything that people can do to motivate that youth base again, that you think?
Well, some of the things that voters, particularly in our area here in the East Village, have been talking about are that there really hasn't been much effort in terms of the grassroots campaign. Some of the candidates that are running for our neighborhood, that they don't have websites, that they don't have Twitter or Facebook or any sort of way that these young voters can reach them and find out what their platforms are. So that's one of the big things, is that young voters in particular are really looking for a more local movement so that they can get more involved with future elections.
So what you're talking about is kind of approaching it from more of a grassroots, community-based level. Is that what I'm hearing?
Absolutely. They want, like they did with when President Obama was running, they want more of more involvement. More sort of ways that they can volunteer, and they felt that this was really lacking in this particular campaign.
Great. Thanks so much, Suzanne, for your insights. We'll be talking to you some more later on in the show.
Thank you.
Now, coming back from the break, we'll have the latest results from the Senate and House races. Please stay with us.
Hi, I'm Rich Jones. I'm the editor of the local East Village. And I think one of the best aspects of our program is that you get to work in one of the most dynamic neighborhoods in New York City.
Describe the East Village.
It's funky, it's gritty, it's crazy, it's fast-paced, it's exciting, There is going to be a lot of video production. There's going to be a lot of audio production, podcasting, photography, audio slideshows.
Students who work on the local are going to get experience at all of those things, and they're going to be able to use all the tools and platform advances that the field is absorbing now. It's not just an introduction to web journalism, it's an introduction to New York and to the future of journalism.
Welcome back to New York University's special election coverage. So far, Republicans are expected to win the House of Representatives, but the Senate is still up in play. And Annie Dietz, our Senate reporter, is here. Annie, what can you tell us? What's the latest?
So, the Senate is, we're still going to Nevada to look at the results, which are still coming in. We have not anything reported yet, but the implications of Nevada for Harry Reid, who is right now the Senate Majority Leader, could be pretty major. If the Democrats do not win the Senate and he wins, then he's out of a job, and that means Mitch McConnell will probably be the one taking over his position. But if he wins and the Democrats do regain control, what that means actually has a lot for New Yorkers, because Chuck Schumer is actually a major player in the runnings for to take over that job if he loses.
Right. So who's Chuck Schumer pulling for tonight?
Right. I mean, that's the question. I mean, he's supporting Harry Reid, of course, but there is some chatter that he and Dick Durbin, who's the other potential new majority leader, are organizing some some votes in each of their favors behind the scenes. So we'll see what happens.
Right. Now, Annie, another really interesting race that I wanted to ask you about is out in Alaska.
Right.
Murkowski mounting a write-in campaign. What can you tell us about that?
This is a really, really big deal. So she lost in the primaries, and she lost to Joe Miller, who is a Tea Party-backed Republican, or GOP, and she decided to run anyway instead of backing him and conceding her defeat. So it's now a three-way race, which has actually given a new spark to the Democratic Party in that state, because Scott McAdams, who is the Democrat, kind of had no chance before, but now that the Republicans are split, they're thinking that there might be a shot for him. But that's going to play out probably over time, because the write-ins, if there are more write-in ballots that end up being filled out than actual candidate ballots, Alaska has 2 weeks to count that, so it could be it could be a while before we really know what's going on there.
This is something new for us to watch, because the Tea Party, this is the first election where that's really been a factor. So that'll be really interesting to see how it plays out.
Yeah, and these are two races, Nevada and Alaska, both are really tight, and we're going to have to wait and see what happens, and will the Tea Party have their victory there?
Thanks, Annie.
Thank you.
Well, speaking of the Tea Party, earlier in the program we learned what the Tea Party is, but just who are these Tea Partiers, and do they even exist in a city like New York? Well, I went to a recent rally to find out.
Tell the truth! Tell the truth! Tell the truth!
While it's not uncommon to see angry Tea Parties across the nation, it's less common to see a Tea Party as diverse as this one.
My father's from Jamaica. He's Chinese and Indian, and he's Chinese, Indian, and Irish, and my mother's Cuban, black, and white. So therefore, I'm not rich. I'm not of any religion, and I'm not white.
New York City's local chapter, Tea Party 365, drew supporters from across the tri-state area at the New York Times and NBC buildings to protest what they call the media's liberal bias. But in spite of this poor track record, they trusted reporters at least enough to give them one more chance to get it right. Past rallies in New York City drew up to 10,000 supporters. While this one drew only 100, they certainly made their point loud and clear.
Local members are Republican!
Passions are running high here as New York Tea Partiers demand that the media finally tell the truth. And they say one of the media's biggest lies is that the Tea Party is racist.
I'm here because I'm protesting against the liberal media not portraying us conservatives correctly, saying that we're Islamophobes, bigots, racist.
In fact, Organizers say race has very little to do with what the party stands for.
It has appeal for people who are fiscally conservative, who are concerned about overreach in government. It's not limited to your color.
No representative from the New York Times or NBC was on hand to respond to protesters, nor did they respond to our requests for a statement. Tea Party 365 focuses on educating the public on the issues. They do not endorse specific candidates or even parties.
Even if the Republicans win, that's one tiny step. We are not in the pocket of the Republican Party. We will watch them as much as we watch the Democrats.
But they do encourage supporters to make a difference at the polls.
You guys are making history.
Reporting for NYU's Election Night Special, this is Andrew Homewood.
Now joining us here in the studio to talk about some of the House races is our very own Becky Flom. Now Becky, Republicans have made significant gains tonight. Which of those gains has surprised you the most?
Well, for me, what's really surprised me is those long-term Democrats that have lost their seats. You know, they're projecting that Ike Skelton in Missouri's 4th district, he's been there for 34 years, you know, he's going to be ousted tonight. You know, and that's just a long part of a long list of Republicans, of Democrats, you know, that are losing their seats tonight. Like I mentioned before, John Spratt in South Carolina, you know, all over the country, some long-term Democrats.
Do you think that's a response to sort of anger at the establishment in Washington?
I think a lot of it is, you know, the Republicans made sure they communicated a fear of an expanding government, and I felt and I think that voters felt like this was sort of a referendum on Obama economics, and that sort of sense of creeping. One of the, I should say though that the Democrats did gain a seat in Delaware. They won, and it against a Tea Party candidate, and it really seemed to, you know, Delaware kind of rejected the Tea Party, it seems like.
Yeah, that was very much a much anticipated race.
Right, on both accounts.
Yeah. Now, tell us, Becky, is there any historical significance to the losses that the Democrats have incurred in this
Well,
election?
I mean, you know, you look at their 62 seats that they're going to lose. Clinton, after his first 2 years, lost 52 seats, also sort of largely due to him pushing through health care. So I think there is sort of this large number that's pretty significant.
Well, thank you, Becky, very much for that. Now, coming up, we're going to take a look at how elections have played out locally right here in the East Village. Thanks for joining us on New York University's special election night coverage. We now turn to NYU's own backyard, the East Village. Just what's at stake in our local community in these elections? Haya, Fatima, Iqbal, and Joshua Frank are at Alibi, a bar in the East Village where Tea Party supporters have gathered. Now, Haya, who's there and what's the feeling there so far?
There's a crowd over here which is full of Republicans. There's a lot of support for Libertarians and Tea Party supporters as well. There's a lot of support for Campaign for Liberty, which is precisely the reason why Rand Paul's recent speech, his latest speech, which he carried out in Kentucky, was very well received by people. There are cheers on any Republican win which takes place, whether it's from the Senate or from the Congress. This is absolutely not a place for Democrats and liberals. Liberalism has been labeled as a disease of the mind over here recently, and even a false ideology. Technically speaking, some of the issues that the Republicans have addressed in this party include the fact that there has been no middle-class tax from the Democratic government up to now, and also the fact that they're still waiting for economic prosperity with promises which Democrats wanted to fulfill but apparently haven't been able to. And then there's a lot of general support in this bar, which is located in between the East Village and West Village of New York City. People usually gather here who belong to the Campaign for Liberty and for the Tea Party. So they have their regular events over here. That is why they also have a party over here tonight. And one of the slogans which was continuously being chanted over here was that we'll take the Hill and then we'll take the White House. And with these details, it's back to you to the studio.
And back with us again is political reporter Suzanne Rosdiva. Suzanne, as we can see, East Villagers are very passionate about the politics, passionate about their community. And you know, I think one issue that East Villagers deal with a lot is noise. A lot of bars, a lot of restaurants. Has that been an issue that any of the local candidates have run on?
That has been the most prominent issue with our local candidates. Our local state senator, Senator Squadron, who is in the 25th district, he actually helped pass legislation, the Squadron Schimminger bill, in August, which will help to control the noise violations and help control really some of the bars in the East Village where people are finding that there are a lot of crowds outside, there's a lot of violence happening, so they're hoping that this bill will help decrease that sort of activity around the bars.
What specifically will that do? Will it curtail bar hours, or how will that be implemented?
Right, absolutely. Well, it gives the state liquor authority a little bit more control over the complaints that are made against the various establishments. So there's going to be a stricter sort of overlooking of the various complaints that are made by the neighborhood.
So really following through on complaints that we hear from the neighborhood.
Absolutely, because a lot of people in the neighborhood now feel that falls through the cracks and that they're not being heard. So having a state senator focus on a local issue of noise is really important to the community.
Now, just to switch gears a little bit, it's a big issue for many in the East Village, though not as profound. It's the issue of bed bugs. Now, some major candidates have spoken about that. What have they said, and has that played a role at all in these elections?
It actually has played a role in these elections, and Congresswoman Carolyn Maloney, who is also running, she talked to the local East Village about how it's really becoming a very significant issue in the city. She's talked to people who have had experiences with bedbugs in their apartments, and she said that there's really no help right now for people who are dealing with this issue, that they have to pay for it on their own, that they don't know where to go. So she really wants federal funding to help this problem, and she's trying to get the city to really recognize that this is something serious that's affecting a lot of people in the neighborhood.
Mm-hmm. Another serious issue for a lot of people in the neighborhood, I think, is traffic safety for pedestrians, cyclists. Have any candidates run on this issue?
Yes, actually, Senator Squadron also just helped pass legislation called Haley and Diego's Law, which puts stricter punishment on first offense for drivers who are careless drivers who hurt either pedestrians or bicyclists in the East Village. And as we know, bicyclists in our bike lanes are a very prominent and very important issue for our East Village neighborhood community. And so he really saw that there was a problem with pedestrians getting hurt and bicyclists getting hurt by these careless drivers. So that's something that was recently also enacted. And
Suzanne, could you just give us some background as to where that name Haley and Diego came from?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it was, Senator Squadron really takes it personally when it comes to people in our community who are hurt, by these sort of careless drivers. And he actually met the family of, these two young people who had been affected directly by careless drivers. And he wanted to make sure that we really are paying attention to local issues, not just issues that he's dealing with in the state, but issues that are specific to the East Village.
Now from the East Village, we go over to West Harlem, where Cynthia Medina and Loretta Vanderhorst are standing by. Now, they are right outside Democratic offices with the latest. What can you tell us about where you are?
Well, Eliza and Andrew, I'm reporting from the Martin Luther King Democratic Club in West Harlem on 128th and 7th Avenue. And Charles B. Rangel, he just spoke here. He just won a re-election for Congress against Republican Michael Faulkner. He mentioned Obama during his speech, and what he said was a, quote, large amount of progress in a short amount of time. Singer Jackie Rowe Adams just saying, God bless America. People are celebrating here. There's food, soda, fried chicken, mac and cheese. Lots of locals are taking part here. I spoke to locals earlier, and they told me that some of the biggest issues in the area during this election season have been health care and providing low-income housing for people who are being displaced in the area. And I also spoke to Lynette, who works for Councilwoman Inez E. Dickens, and she says that one of the biggest issues this election season has been providing after-school programs for the youth in the area to keep them out of trouble. Vinny B., he's a 60-year-old member of the Democratic Club, and he says that locals here, they don't just vote for governor and higher up positions, they also look at Assembly, Congress, Senate. They're very informed in politics, and they know what they're doing. They're very active during the election season. Kalfani Dobusu is a 35-year-old, and he says that the biggest issue this election season has been jobs. People are still having a hard time finding jobs in the area. And I spoke to Bruce Williams. He's visiting from Pittsburgh, and he says that this election season especially, Republicans have been more fierce and that there is added pressure for black candidates to be in office after Obama's presidency. And so everyone here is celebrating. There's food in there, and it's a big win tonight for the Democrats. So I'm going to go join in the festivities. So back to you in the studio.
Good. Well, we hope you enjoy. Thank you so much for that report. Now, as intense as the battles has been in key states on the national level, here in New York, the results of these elections could change the way some people live in the city, literally. Jialing Zhang and Wei Ge tell us how.
State senator is?
I have no idea.
And this is the senator, but try to get out to vote because every vote's going to count.
Right up today, tenant advocates in New York City canvass door to door in neighborhoods where tonight's election might help them get new state Senate votes. They have one goal in mind, to repeal vacancy decontrol. Vacancy decontrol is a New York State housing provision enacted in the 90s that allows landlords to deregulate rent-controlled and rent-stabilized apartments when the original tenant moves out and rent exceeds $2,000 per month. Tenant advocates claim that the law has caused at least about 300,000 apartments in the city to be deregulated from rent protection.
The other thing about vacancy decontrol is that it is a terrific incentive to landlords to harass people to get out.
Ronji Xiao lived in this rent-regulated apartment for 19 years, until December 2008, when he was evicted for fire code violations. Xiao and housing advocates have reason to be optimistic about changing the law after September's primary. The man who blocked a bill to repeal vacancy decontrol last June, Andrew Espada, was defeated by Gustavo Rivera, who supports to repeal vacancy decontrol.
Where tenants won't flee homelessness because their rent laws are being written by wealthy landlords.
But it is not yet time for tenant activists to celebrate.
If we do not repeal vacancy decontrol, eventually all rent regulation will disappear.
Because there are a lot of rent-stabilized buildings there.
And they'll be working right up to next spring when they take the bus again to Albany, hoping for a warmer reception from the state senators elected today. Wei Ge and Jialing Zhang reporting for NYU Election Special.
Thank you, Jialing Zhang and Wei Ge. We're coming to the end of the final hour, and we're going to close with all of our panelists here with us today to get some final thoughts on what this election has meant and what implications it could have going forward. Thomas, we'll start with you. What is your takeaway from what we've seen tonight?
Well, I think the big thing is, as we've talked about previously, is the economy. So we have the financial crisis, high unemployment, and I think for a lot of Americans that means greater uncertainty. You couple that with the healthcare, and you see a big change in the status quo, and not a lot of people are happy with that. And the people that are not happy with this tend to be conservative, tend to be older, tend to sort of see traditional values being threatened. And I think that's what you sort of see in this election, is that conservatives are coming out to voice their displeasure at what they see as the radical change that has happened under the Obama administration. Now, we might not think of this as that radical, but to them it's really, it's really about, we're going to say that this is not okay. We don't like all this uncertainty.
So what is the overall message? Is it just that these older voters have come out saying we don't like where this is going, or is it also the younger voters saying we're not going out to vote? We're sort of almost apathetic about this all. What do you think?
Yeah, I think it's also the younger voters just really feeling like they have no sort of connection to this campaign compared to the presidential campaign. They felt that there wasn't enough volunteer movement, that there wasn't enough of a reaching out to the younger voters. And I think that that's something that really needs to be looked at in the future campaigns, because the young voters really did come out for President Obama's election, and it needs to be focused on, there needs to be more of a grassroots campaign, especially on the Democratic side. And I think that young voters felt that they were neglected, except for towards the end of the campaign.
Well, Thomas talked about dissatisfaction being a motivating factor to get people out to the polls. When I went to that Tea Party, I felt like the strongest emotion that I could feel was anger. And I was surprised at how angry a lot of voters were.
I mean, anger and fear, now we're getting a little mushy here, but anger and fear, those two things tend to go hand in hand. I think a lot of conservative voters, fear the uncertainty, and they need some place to sort of direct this anger. And President Obama, he talks a little bit different than presidents in the past. And I think for a lot of voters, that was seen as a threat. And then you couple that with the high unemployment, the uncertainty about the financial crisis. And I think what you have is a perfect storm for the Republicans to gain in the House as they had. Now, Democrats have held the Senate a little more. I think that's what our numbers are showing us. But I still think this is a big election for the Republicans.
Now, I know you mentioned that the Republicans have potentially taken over the House of Representatives, and they still didn't quite make it with the Senate. But what do you think are the implications of this? Is it going to be a sort of gridlock in Washington now?
Yeah, that's going to be the answer. It does look like they're going to take the House, but not the Senate. And without majorities in the Senate, they can't really move a lot of policy because they're just not going to have the votes to override a veto or even get something that's as conservative as they'd like through the House.
So what should President Obama's strategy be for the next 2 years, given that?
I think it's going to be hard. He has a decision to make. Either he can play bipartisanship with the Republicans and try to move policy along a little bit, or he can use them as a foil and say, see, I've said they're always saying no, they're not doing anything, nothing's changing. So he has a decision on what path he wants to take regarding the House Republicans.
Thank you, Lindsay, and thank you to all of you. We'll be going to break right now, but we'll be coming right back with the final results of the Cuomo-Palladino race, so stick with us.
Hi, I'm Rich Jones. I'm the editor of the local East Village. And I think one of the best aspects of our program is that you get to work in one of the most dynamic neighborhoods in New York City.
Describe the East Village.
It's funky, it's gritty, it's crazy, it's fast-paced, it's exciting. There is going to be a lot of video production. There's going to be a lot of audio production, podcasting, photography, audio slideshows.
Students who work on the local are going to get experience at all of those things, and they're going to be able to use all the tools and platform advances that the field is absorbing now. It's not just an introduction to web journalism, it's an introduction to New York and to the future of journalism.
And as we sign out for the evening, just one last update on the New York gubernatorial race. Cuomo has 60%, Palladino at 36%. Thank you for being with us.
We hope you have a good night. Thank you.